Okay. Everyone come back in. Thank you. How was lunch? It's good? Well, how was the wine with lunch? Okay, just before we kick off the next session, we just have a couple of quick announcements. A couple of people asked about dinner tonight. Where is dinner? It is at the Fortis Sports Center. So it's the same place as the party on the agenda. So it's a walk, it's a building on the other side of the parking structure. Also, I don't know, for those of you guys that was with me in room B, it was a little bit difficult sometimes to hear because people in group A is so loud. So we have gotten another room just down the hallway. So session B is no longer the second half of this room. It is a separate room right over there called that. Okay. So with that out of the way, I would like to introduce our CEO, Chief Engineering Officer, no, Director of Engineering. That's right. Yeah, Ivan, who's going to do a panel on resilience based on Judo.
Thank you, Martin. Vieko, he has a new joke about CEO, so we'll talk about it later. Thank you so much for being here. I didn't expect such a large audience. This is the most popular slot after lunch. So we will talk about Judo for resilient organizations. So now you could be wondering, what does Judo has to do with organizations? I had a couple of strange looks when I suggested the topic for this talk. So first of all, is there any Judo expert here in the audience? Shit. I was counting that there will be none here, so I can talk rubbish about it. But yeah, it was a long time ago. So what is it all about? So you know how in Judo, it's a self-defense technique. And you are actually using your opponent's force to redirect it and use it against your opponent. So what we are noticing is that similar is happening in the organizational setting too. So organizations are recently taking a lot of hits from the market, from the competition, from product, from great resignation. And we see that some organizations are really struggling with this, but we also see that some organizations are thriving in spite of this. And my theory is that they are not thriving in spite of this, but that they are thriving precisely because of it. And it seems like those organizations have some kind of magical judo moves, and with these moves, they use these blows from the market to turn them into their own advantage. And I will be talking about these organizations and these judo moves with our panel guests today. My intention is even to make them share some of their judo moves. So wish me luck. Maybe we will learn something today. I'm certain. So today in Zadar here with me, I would like to welcome our guests. So Mr. Gabriele Pace, CEO of Intesa San Paolo International Value Services. Hello, Gabriele.
Hi.
Mic check.
Mic check. I know nothing about judo, by the way, and so
I like
that's
that.
not a good start. But
next we have Mr. Peter Blenninger. Peter is managing director and co-founder of CrossDach. Hi, Peter. Nice to see you also here.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. I made it to the yellow belt in judo when I was a small kid, so
please don't make this difficult to me. And we have a special guest here joining us remotely from Chicago, Mr. Scott Prugh. He is a Chief Technology Officer at CSG. Scott, so nice to see you here. I know it's very early in Chicago. Thank you for joining us.
Hey folks, really glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I wish I could be there on site, but we'll give this a shot remote, and hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yeah, that would be really great. Maybe next year. We were thinking about that already. So the leitmotif of this conference is future-proof and how to future-proof our organizations. And we've heard through all of these talks before that resilience really helps in organizations being future-proof. But the resilience as a word is a very overloaded term, and it means a lot of things to different people. So I wanted you to share with us, what do you think of when you think about resilience? What is your definition? What is your personal experience about resilience? Gabriele.
Resilience, can you hear me? Yeah. Resilience is when either an organization or a person is ready to rebound from a distressful situation. And I think there are a few ingredients. There is no one thing that makes an organization resilient. It's a multitude of ingredients. One is to be prepared. I work for actually a banking group in Intesa San Paolo, so a lot of my past experience is on banking. So being prepared means having a solid risk management, assessing your credit risk strategies, assessing your operational risk, IT risk. So there is a lot of preparedness also in a crisis situation, things that we are trained for, and we train ourselves on a regular basis because that's what we need to do. Sometimes we are systemic banks in certain countries. You also need to be agile enough, and you need to be able to adapt to different situations, to different scenarios. Sometimes your products need to change. Sometimes your operating model needs to change. So also your business proposition needs to change. So the structure must be ready for that change. The third element, which I think is important for me, is to be trustworthy. Trustworthy toward your clients and trustworthy toward your employees. Now, there is a specific example that I really care to make to give you maybe a more concrete example of what resilience is. Intesa is a federation of banks, and we are very present in this region of Europe. And one of the banks that we have is in Ukraine. We have roughly 900 colleagues in Ukraine, and the bank didn't stop working since the conflict started. The bank is up and running, is serving clients. How is it possible that in such a distressful situation, the bank is up and running? For the three reasons that I mentioned before, we regularly, and we are not the only bank, of course, that is up and running, also the others, but I'm talking from my personal experience, direct experience. We try to be prepared for risks, for managing different types of risks. We drill for disaster recovery situations. So preparedness plays a huge role. The second thing is adaptivity and being agile. We are trying to train our employees also to take roles which are lateral to their current role. And that in a crisis situation is obviously useful. The third element, which I mentioned, is to be trustworthy toward clients and toward colleagues. Now, how do we build that trust? I can tell you that during this crisis situation, we managed to take hundreds of families out of Ukraine, give them lodging, housing, work. Many of them work from Italy. We used the support also of neighboring countries, but they kept working. In return, the amount of effort of the resources that we have there, they are working 200% in order to make sure that the bank is operational, distributing money, which is, as you can imagine, very important, transporting cash wherever is needed. And that's how trust is built and is mutually built. So I think this is the example that comes to my mind, and what in these circumstances that we're seeing it means a lot of to me.
Story. Really, really amazing. Peter, what is your take on resilience?
After Gabriele's examples, mine are not so interesting anymore. The only thing I would like to add is resilience is always also about the personal feeling, personal mindset of each of us, and the ability to stand up after someone throws you on the floor and pins you down there, to be in the judo picture, and getting up again, and risk awareness is one thing, but like in Ukraine we saw it. There are always some things, like Nassim Taleb calls them, the black swans, that nobody of us has on the agenda. And I think these situations you only can handle when you have a strong mind and are willing to stand up after you fall.
Thank you. And Scott, what is your take on resilience these days?
Well, I think there's a couple things. First, I'd say that leadership is pretty important in building resilience. It's leader's job to set the stage. And I always kind of look at resilience as something where we kind of treat issues that we have as a gift and opportunity, and how can we take that issue and really kind of change it to our advantage. Oftentimes that's hard, and it's hard to kind of see beyond that issue, but it's really important as leaders that we set that example. I think next, and Gabriele mentioned, really preparing in practice is pretty important. Preparing for issues, practicing them. Obviously, with DevOps, there's a lot of stuff that the industry has done around things like chaos testing, breaking our systems, seeing what happens when they fail. There's also established practices which we've adopted, and I highly recommend things like the incident management system, which really is a system that's been put in place to deal with incidents and issues. And it really has a very defined structure and set of roles, which basically help you respond. It's fantastic. And, we've written some papers on that. There's a DevOps Forum paper on incident management. Really getting your teams involved, trained in those things is critical. One other thing, and I think that we've seen with DevOps, is really the cross functionality and the cross training that you get with teams that both build and run their systems can be incredibly powerful for building resilience. Systems have issues, they have outages, and when you have a cross-functional team of both developers and operational engineers supporting that, we found that builds incredible teamwork. It also builds resilience and understanding to improve that system and deal with the incidents and outages. So I think that was just one of the things that we've noticed when we went through our DevOps transformation, is that it really built resilience with the teams.
Great, thank you. And Gabriele, what we see that all organizations are facing these days is having more ideas than the capacity to implement them. And we also heard Professor Brune today say that no matter how technology advances, there will always be more ideas, and there will always be a lack of capacity. So one way to increase that capacity is obviously to engage with external consulting companies. So IVS is a large company with a network of partners. How do you choose, and when do you choose to engage external partners as opposed to using and investing your own capacity into building these products?
First of all, let's say that external consultants are part of our operations in every possible way. Thinking of Intesa Sanpaolo as a group more than IVS is a company of Intesa Sanpaolo. We use external consultants for issues which range from strategic initiatives in guiding the bank in setting the strategic initiatives to more operational matters. Operational matters which can be one-off or can be stable. operations such as mergers and acquisitions or expanding a business line. Often we rely on external consultants, which are part of our daily life. In IVS, IVS is a company that has startup or scale up, let's say, phase. Slightly more than a year and a half, we tripled the number of resources. We started from operation in Croatia. In 1 year, we opened 3 foreign branches, and clearly the support of external consultant has been instrumental to speed this transition. Now, as far as your specific question on IT sourcing strategy, clearly we are challenged by changes that come from the environment. And we see that customer expectations are changing. They're changing. I mean, you can imagine a few years ago, we were not using a mobile or internet banking. We have been, as an industry, very much brick and mortars for many years. We are completely changing the way of operating. There are external players in the market which drive change. There are cost constraints that require some changes. So innovation requires fast reaction. We need to innovate. We need to differentiate ourselves from others. You can imagine the entrance of fintechs in this world has meant really huge changes for us, and has been a huge stimulus for us. So all these changes and strategy requires a careful thinking on when to use external resources also in IT sourcing. What we see is that we would like to concentrate internal resources more on value-added processes, or at least what we perceive as value-added processes, where an internal knowledge is really instrumental for the future. Front-end systems which have a presentation layer, it's part of a customer interaction, which we want to make sure that we govern. So not to say that we don't make use of external resources to accelerate deployments, but the know-how should stay within the organization. Also, interactions with the core knowledge of interactions with the core banking is strictly linked to the customer journey. What is the customer journey in contracting a product requires a deep knowledge of banking. That part, we would like to make sure that there is a strong knowledge which is kept in. Other systems, more, let's say, internal to for internal running of the bank, governance system, reporting system, they will always have a higher degree of external resources versus internal. Now, the situation is not always, we don't have a ratio which is the perfect ratio between internal and external, because it depends on what I just mentioned in many ways. But it also depends on the specific situations of the company. In my current company, in Intesa, the IT team is about, we have 2,000 colleagues, but the externals working with our internal team is a large multiplier of 2,000. It's a large multiplier. Now, the strategy is actually changing, is going actually to reduce the level of external resources in line with what I mentioned before. In IVS, smaller company, but still we are challenged with the same issues of fast development. We are much more on a one-to-one basis, internal and external, and we see the potential of growing the support of external resources. It all depends, it very much depends on our ability, internal ability to govern external resources within the perimeter of our activity. Adding resources is not, in a disorderly way, is not bringing any good to the company. You need to increase your capacity, but in an orderly way, in a way that you can control what you are taking as a company on board.
Thank you. So another proof of Fred Brooks, the mythical man month, and how it doesn't make any sense to add additional people on a project that is already late to make it successfully finished. So, and this is really nicely maps to, Scott will probably know what Courtney Kistler was also saying about organizations and client organizations and best practices in engaging with consulting organizations. And from her point of view, from a point of view of a client organization in this situation, IVS, she mentioned three things. Two are very important. One is create win-win situation. The other one is please involve your people also in these initiatives and provide all necessary domain knowledge. So this knowledge can stay in-house and be reused later on, which is super important when working with external partners. Thank you. Scott, another way to increase organization's capacity is to actually improve the flow of value that flows through the organization. So to remove the friction during the delivery process. So this can rarely be done without revisiting organizational structure and interactions that happen between teams and between different departments. So I know that CSG is well underway in its DevOps journey. Could you share with us your experience and your insights in improving the flow of value through the organization?
Sure. That's a fantastic question, and one that's kind of dear to my heart. As you know, a lot of the things that we've done have really been kind of focused on doing that and trying to improve the delivery of value. I would say the first thing in the first place that I always like to start is really measurement and really looking at how the flow of value flows in the organization or doesn't flow. And this really includes things like value stream mapping, or really even kind of taking your work items and measuring things like lead time. How long does it take for that work item to get through the system? And that may be a request from a customer or a request from another team. And also the cycle times, really, what are all the steps in there? And obviously, the concept of flow time on this is important. Kirsten, the team at TaskTop, does a lot of work there of really measuring flow time. And flow time really is the percentage of time that something is active and how long something sits. With that base of measurement, then you start to get the understanding of what the architecture of work, but also kind of what the architecture of the organization looks like. Because often you'll see those work items, stop at different teams. So you may have a requirements team, you may have a product management team, and then you may have a software team that actually does the implementation. So when you start doing that measurement, you can start to see where those things stop or don't flow. And so with that, then it can get us a much better understanding of where to target improvements. And they may be simple stuff like, hey, automate steps that are manual, but they may be other things which really are the next things that we've looked at, which is maybe collapsing some of those handoffs. And we, really looked at doing those things of bringing teams together, maybe having those folks co-located on a team. It also, forced us to do some things to say, hey, let's get the team that's going to do the implementation closer to the customer. So instead of having, oftentimes you find kind of a traditional feature factory where there's a lot of upstream work done to prepare the feature, prepare requirements, document requirements. And some of those things are necessary, but oftentimes that can keep, the feature, many months of work get done up front, as opposed to really doing a lighter touch on those types of requirements and connecting then that, the feature request to the team. And then, there's other techniques that we have used. I'm really a big fan of what the Team of Teams, which is a fantastic book by Stanley McChrystal, of the liaison model, where we'll take and embed, architects into maybe client-facing organizations and teams, and we'll even flip it and we'll take folks from those teams and embed them on development teams, and that really increases the empathy, but also the understanding and flow of value.
Excellent. I was wondering, can you give us a bit of encouragement here? I know that a lot of organizations are struggling with starting with these measurements. So everything starts with mapping this flow of value through the organization, and it's sometimes difficult to map this flow and to get some measurements that you can start with. And I know that analysis paralysis hits really hard, and you stop until you have the precise numbers. How did you start with this? Did you wait for a perfect storm to happen, or did you go iteratively, step by step, into this measurement process?
Definitely iteratively, and I would suggest and encourage folks, kind of just get started in some of this. There is so much value that can be yielded in just measuring the way the work works, that is often surprising, and just kind of starting from when you get a request. And the good thing is that we have IT systems, whether they are SDLC management systems, whether they're ticket request systems, like ServiceNow or Helix. Any of those systems actually have work items in them where you can start to just measure how long those items sit, and you can do some basic reporting to kind of link those together. The other thing that I like to do is just go sit with some people doing the work and really ask them where their work comes from. What do they do when they get that work? What happens when they finish that work? And that can give you some incredible insight into how painful or how long things take. So, for example, one of the times we did this, I sat with one of the managers on a team, and he had sticky notes kind of all over his monitor of different colors. And I started asking him, well, what are these sticky notes, what they mean? They had numbers on them. And he's like, oh, well, each different color is a different system that I work in. So for example, we had Jira, Helix, Heat was another system. And so he had different colors for all the different work items in those systems. And then he would basically take a work item from one system and then link it to another system. And sitting with him and with his team, we were able to understand that there was really a lot of cognitive overhead in the work processes that they had. And so really starting to understand that really kind of led us down a path that we really wanted to consolidate and integrate those work management systems together. So a couple things to summarize, just get started, go look in your current work management systems and see how long things wait and how long tickets wait. The other thing is sit with your teams and really kind of try to understand, what the pain is on how they work in these systems and start mapping those things out. And, this doesn't have to be, an arduous process where we have to bring lean consultants in. You can really yield a lot by really doing those two things first.
Thank you. Still on the topic of increasing the organizational capacity, there is even one more third way to increase the organizational capacity, and it's almost like a fake one. You are not really increasing the capacity of your organization. You are rather choosing not to spend your capacity on non-strategic work, but rather investing it in a more strategic work. So this is something that we would probably call prioritization. So Peter, what are your thoughts on prioritization as a judo move to increase the capacity?
Also, you had this intro with the opponent, and you use the energy of your opponent and to make things going easier. One of the biggest opponents, I think, is inside the company, the traditions or the habits that maybe already overcome, but you still have them in your company. So one thing I personally like very much is to get rid of old stuff. I think we have a lot of programmers here, so you have your garbage collectors. In nature, we have our systems how to get rid of old stuff. And companies or social technical institutions, as Michael Heiss called them this morning, they normally do not have this kind of garbage collector. And there's a small exercise. You don't have to change the whole company, but just post sending out reports and see who is complaining when he when he or she doesn't get the report anymore. So this saves a lot of money, is pretty easy, and for us IT guys normally and a very easy move, because we always can say, oh well, there's something in the system broken, and this saves a lot of money and time, because your employees, your colleagues don't have to mess around with old reports. And even one thing that is much more changing the behavior of a company is when you do the same trick with meetings. For example, you tell your colleagues not to attend to meetings where there is no agenda, where there is not a focus group that is invited, and where normally you know that these people don't document what comes out in the meeting. So all these kind of meetings are normally a waste of time. And give your colleagues and show them by not attending these meetings yourself. This is a waste of time, and you can save so much time that you could give your people to experiment with new things that really brings you forward in the future. And I think there are so many resources uncovered in your organizations that this Fredmund Malik, that's a fellow of Peter Drucker, called it the systematic garbage collector. And you should invent something in your company.
System architecture garbage collector.
It's a systematic garbage collector.
Systematic garbage collector.
To ask yourself the question, what are the things that you have in place, and when you would have to decide it again, would you really invest something in this thing that you have there? This works for big systems, but also very good for these small habits, the traditional habits nobody gets rid of.
Great. This one was great. And Gabriele, talking again about engaging with external companies and external partners, it's really important to set from the beginning the expectations from both sides. And I'm especially talking about ways of working. And we've seen tide turn in the industry from body rental mode to fixed price model to agile way of working. What is your take on these ways of working, and do you see that any of these in your circumstances works better for certain scenarios?
Yes, I don't think it's a matter of tides. Maybe there are tides of and waves of how the companies are used to work. I think it's a matter of applying the model that best suits. So if we look at fixed price contracts, clearly they have some characteristics. They are, we call it turnkey contracts, well-defined in scope, budget is set at the beginning, milestones and completion date is set. Advantages and disadvantages. Advantage is that predictability is typically high. The interaction with the vendors are constant but limited, because the functionality is already set in the beginning. The perimeter is well known, so there is a lower engagement in that respect. But any change to the original scope, it can be very costly. So that requires some careful thinking. On the other hand, time and material contracts are more adaptable to longer-term type of engagements where the complexity is higher. You fix certain rates, and then according to the dynamics of the engagement of the contracts, the engagement is potentially changed. But let's say budget is not always a fixed figure. Actually, it is not. But they are more, let's say, adequate for more complex type of projects. In our case, it is exactly the complexity and the duration of the project itself that makes us think on whether a certain type of contract is more suitable. Typically, let's say front-end systems require a high interaction between stakeholders. You have business which needs to be consulted quite often. We have different banks. We have a parent company. We have vendors. The interaction is quite complex, and that gives some level of uncertainty that doesn't make that project adequate for a turnkey type of solution. One instead, let's say, back-end systems or also front-end functionality, but well-defined in their perimeter. They are typically on a turnkey type of engagements. So we try to balance between the two. We don't always succeed in making the right choice. I mean,
Better.
we are getting better, and also with the help of, actually, what is very important is that external partners are also there to support us in making the right decision. And okay, we have a special case of a project which we ran in our subsidiary in Egypt, where you have successfully supported us. But the beginning, the starting phase was, I think, because of our fault. Let's say it was envisaged to be more on a turnkey type of project, while instead it couldn't be. So, I mean, external partners are fundamental also for the company to be able to shape in the best possible way.
I think this is precisely that win-win that we talked about earlier, and how we need to see from different perspectives the whole thing. You will remember this morning we had that panel around technical aspects of future-proof, and we will briefly touch upon that, Scott. In progressive organizations, organization is basically inseparable from the technology. And the technology is an enabler, but it has to be kept up to date, and it has to be in line with customer expectations. We know, for example, all the benefits that cloud computing is bringing us today. We also see that customer expectations are moving toward more real-time scenarios, so we need to somehow support that. And if we are not very intentional about keeping this technology up to date, this technology could turn from an enabler to a burden. And I know that at CSG you had several these technological shifts. How did you cope with them over the years, being a 35-year-old company?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and I think the first thing is really, and you mentioned it, is to think about technology as an enabler that's really kind of vital to invest in over time. And then the second piece of that is that systems don't run themselves, and they do need really kind of a modernization roadmap. And really kind of from that understanding then is to really get your business stakeholders on board and talk their language for how we kind of do that investment. And their language is usually money. And so trying to figure out how to translate the cost of not doing something with your system into kind of money or risk is incredibly important. So kind of in our case, we've got, technologies that have been developed over the last several decades that really were kind of causing day-to-day operational issues, but more the problem that we were seeing is that these technologies could not keep up with the growth in the company. So we really looked at that and kind of translated that problem to the business stakeholders, which in our case are many of the product management teams. Really, they control the investment or product company, so they kind of control that investment roadmap. And really the executive teams to basically go and say, look, if we don't make investments to modernize these technologies, we're continue to not be able to keep up with, the customer demand. So for example, one of our big areas that we kind of looked out at was really the growth of mobile and the growth of self-service in both telecom and cable. And to support that massive growth over the years, we saw that we were going to have to modernize our systems so that they were cheaper to run. We could actually get greater scale. And so what we did is we really kind of painted that business case investment in terms of the dollar costs lost to the business. In other words, the business that we would not be able to get. if we didn't invest in the system. So we really kind of translated it into their language. The other thing that we did, and really kind of from a stability standpoint, and remember with DevOps, both with quality, stability, and speed can be differentiators. We really looked at the risks and the outages that we were having with those systems and translated those into dollars for the business owners around, this is how much outages are causing you, causing us and our customers. And if we can reduce those by half, we can actually yield benefits to our business, but also most importantly, first, our customers' business by having fewer outages, because we're a SaaS platform and we run products on behalf of our customers. So really kind of taking those things, we're then able to build, kind of this investment roadmap. Now, the final piece I would say is really workforce sustainability, and really looking at that as something that is key to invest over time for the business, but also a risk if you don't have a view into it. As technologies get older, bottom line is they become harder to support. And, sometimes it's harder to find talent. Sometimes those technologies are just way more difficult to do things in. So we really kind of looked at that of, training and upskilling our people, also being able to hire new talent, and looking over time how we're able to do that. This is over 5-10 years. If we can't get talent to actually support our systems, that's a longer term risk to the business that we can translate, really to the business stakeholders to say, look, in 10 years, if we're running these systems and we can't hire people, we need a roadmap to modernize those. And we need a roadmap to train our people so that they can support those new technologies. So that's really kind of how the overall picture of how we looked at the modernization and translated it to the business stakeholders to get the investment that we needed.
Thank you. So I hear the same language as a key differentiator between some other approaches. So having the same language to explain this to all other lines of business in the organization. Peter, we mentioned that technology is changing, but the technology is not the only thing that is changing. Customer expectations are also changing, and the hallmark of all successful organizations today is this ability to predict what customers need. Is this really luck, or is it something behind this ability to predict what customers really need?
I would say it is still luck, but you can do something that maybe you are luckier than the others.
Sorry, luck favors the ready ones.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when we look at customer expectations, then we are today aware that we have a customer journey. When we look at our offers from the outside, and we have our process map when we look at the same, or from the internal to the outside. And we know that when we have a touch point with the customer that has no corresponding process, then we probably have something that we should fix. And with all these touch points, we can measure how our customer expectations move over the time or become different. So that's when you say you move from the Morton brick shops to the mobile, then probably one reason is it is much easier to measure customer interactions on a mobile phone than it is when they enter your store. So therefore you need, of course, a lot of information that you track. First you have to collect it, then you have to deal with all this data. So this is where maybe AI can help us very much. And on the other side, you have to experiment on the touch points with your customers and maybe enhance your existing offerings with something new. And you don't know how this is accepted. So what do? You do testing. You do at least A/B testing, like everybody in marketing, or maybe more than A/B, more variants. And out of this data, you can maybe easily predict how your customer behavior will change over time. And you do surveys and all this stuff. But of course, you need luck, because out of the blue, there comes a competitor that you were not aware that there is a competitor that has a much better solution than your good solution. And as we all know, this is the dead of the good solution. And so I would say there is still, it's a complex system with a lot of parameters, and luck is definitely necessary. But as I said in the beginning, the more you do and the more you invest in this customer journey thing, the higher is your probability that you will survive.
Thank you. Wrapping this conversation slowly up and thinking about all these judo moves that we were mentioning, and maybe some of them that we didn't mention, which one would you choose as the one that you consider to be your secret sauce in the organization? Gabriele.
My God, I don't think there is, as I said at the beginning, I don't think there is one. First of all, I don't know anything about judo, but besides from that, I don't think there is one move. I think it's a combination of factors. I mean, if I really had to scale it down, I would say that investing in people is the most important of all the factors that we mentioned. Not only training, but creating the trust between the organization and people. Take care of your people, encourage lateral thinking, encourage diversity. You don't want to be surrounded by people that think alike, but promote lateral thinking. And that, I think, is it's one of the ingredients for being ready for the next change, which is around the corner. It's inevitable, yes.
Thank you. Scott, what would you choose?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd echo what Gabriele said. I mean, investing in your people and leaders, and really kind of shadowing the this really kind of expectation of resilience and adaptability. I think that is pretty important. Spending time getting to know your people and really investing in them, I think, is one of the key things, and really spreading that to all the team levels. I think that is key. And then the next thing I would say is preparing. And I had mentioned this, practice for failures. Create an organization that understands failure is a reality, and create that psychological safety, so folks are not really they're not immune to the fact that things don't always work out, and they are willing to kind of address that and move on. I think those are some vital things.
Yeah, I think this is important. Things not always work out, but we need to be able to bounce back from this. Peter, your last thoughts.
Is it working? Yeah, no. So I'm again, think we are all on the same plate. So I would say people and trust and openness. And when it comes to leadership, it's not about the heroes. It's about the people who integrate this diversity and bring it all together, and give the people the chance, or the people that like to work on something that is necessary and can do it. And these are not normally someone the hierarchy picks, but maybe people who feel for some reason interested in this topic and qualified in this topic. And I think this different way of working is that the leaders are motivating and coaching their people to take these chances, and not so the heroes from the past. So I would say that's the superpower of the modern companies.
I love this. It's not about heroes. I think that Martin says we'll be taking questions in the break. Thank you to my guests here in Zadar. Thank you, Scott, for being with us today. It means a lot to us. Thank you, everybody. Questions in the break. I hope you had a good time. And Martin, you can take over. Thank you all.
Great. Oh, hello. Thank you for that, Ivan. So just two quick announcements. I'll send you guys on your way. Since this is the last time today we're all in the same room, I just want to mention that the official conference program tomorrow begins at 10:30. But before that, at 9:45, there's a special session in this room, which sounds pretty cool. It's about kicking off, getting a reset. It's some yoga. There's some guided meditation. There's some way for you guys to all recover from the festivities of tonight. I think this will be a good thing for all of us. I plan to be there. I hope you all will as well. Beside that, remember that room B has moved. We're not splitting this room anymore. It's down the hallway. So if you're going to the innovation workshop on how to future-proof your projects, it's going to be just down the hall. All right, thank you.